Hi, 8th grade. We're going to start with section 3, which is chemical compounds in cells. So if you'd open up your book to page 25, we're going to go through this. Now this one is going to sound like a health lesson of things you should and shouldn't eat, but it's actually all the things that your cells need to function. And a lot of these things come from the food that you eat. So this starts out by talking about elements and compounds. Now we've already covered that pretty in depth when we went over the periodic table. So just to remind you that an element is a substance that cannot be broken down. And you know that there's 118 elements found on the periodic table. And then if you turn the page, when you start combining those elements, you form a compound. And everything in the world then is made up of these compounds. So there's two different types. There's organic and inorganic. Now, organic is something that was living. Inorganic was never alive. So we need to know the difference between those two compounds. And it says that some important groups of organic compounds found in living things are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Okay? And a lot of those things have carbon in them. So the element carbon, there's a whole carbon cycle. But yes, those are the organic compounds. And then the inorganic compounds don't contain carbon. And this would be like water and sodium chloride, which is salt. Those were never alive. So they are inorganic. Now, going into our vocab words here. So we have carbohydrate, which you're familiar with, carbs as we like to call them, but it's just an energy-rich organic compound made of the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay, so sugars and starches are examples of carbs, which you can get sugars, or you can get like organic sugars from fruits, and some vegetables have high sugar content. Obviously, a lot of the stuff that we eat has like extra sugar added. But then things that have a lot of like starches would be like potatoes, pasta, rice, bread. So if people are cutting out carbs, they're usually cutting out stuff like that to kind of, because what your body does is it turns it just right into sugar. And so if you're trying to cut back on that, usually carbs and sugar kind of go hand in hand when you're trying to reduce the amount in your body. But both plant and animal cells need carbohydrates in order to survive and to help reproduce and keep making things. So it says that carbohydrates are found in cell membranes. Cellulose, which is found in the cell walls of plants, is a type of carbohydrate. Okay, so they're found in both animal and plant cells. The next thing are called lipids. Those may be a little bit unfamiliar to you, but they are very similar to carbohydrates. They are energy-rich organic compounds made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And I was like, wait a minute, wasn't carbohydrates the same thing? Yes, but it's in different amounts. So maybe there's 6 carbon, 12 hydrogen, 6 oxygen in a carbohydrate, but maybe there's 8 carbon, 14 hydrogen, and 8 oxygen in a lipid. So again, we just combine more and more of the elements to create a different type of compound. So a lipid contains even more energy than carbohydrates, and the cells store these for later use. And that gives the example of a bear that hibernates in wintertime. They live on the energy stored in their fat within its cells. And it says many cell membranes are made of lipids. So that's kind of like what keeps those bears going during that time. Turn the page to proteins. It says, what do a bird's feathers, a spider's web, and your fingernails all have in common? They're all made of proteins. So protein, they're just large organic molecules made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and in some cases sulfur. So these have a little bit more to them than the carbohydrates and the lipids do. And so foods that are high in protein include meat, eggs, fish, nuts, and beans. All right, so any of those things, if you're needing some protein, those are good things to eat. But again, everything in moderation when we're talking about stuff like that. And so these proteins, though, they're made of smaller molecules, which are called amino acids. And it says that there's only about 20 common amino acids, but the cool thing is it's kind of like the alphabet, where we only have 26 letters in our alphabet, but when you combine them, you can make a gazillion different words. So same thing with the amino acids. If you combine those in different amounts and different ratios, you can make so many different proteins. Again, it's just like, what do the proteins do? They form parts of cell membranes. They also make up many of the organelles within the cell. If we didn't have proteins, then our cells aren't going to survive. And another word that might be new to you is called an enzyme. And it's a type of protein that speeds up a chemical reaction in a living thing. So it says that there's enzymes in your saliva that help break down the food that you're eating so that when it gets to your digestive system, it's easier to process and it can pull out the stuff that it needs. You know, it breaks down the starches and the sugars so that they can go where they need to go. And I just like the picture of the peacock at the bottom of the page. They're saying that his feathers are made of proteins. The next thing are nucleic acids. And these are very long organic molecules of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Now, these are super important. These carry out life. They tell you your cell, what kind of cell it is. They tell you, what kind of animal you are. Like, they can tell you what kind of plant you are. So there's two types. Here's the long word, deoxyribonucleic acid, or thankfully somebody shortened it to DNA. You've all heard of that. And that's our genetic material that carries information about the organism and is passed from parent to offspring. Okay, that's why we all look different, because we each have different sets of DNA. And then another type is ribonucleic acid, or RNA. And this helps produce proteins. It's found in the cytoplasm as well as the nucleus. And later on in this book, when we get to genetics, we'll go more in depth on DNA and RNA, but this is just kind of scratching the surface. But those are really cool. And I've heard that if you stretch out the DNA from all of your cells, it could go around the world or something. I don't know how many times. So we'll get there. Google it. And on the last page, is that we as living things need water. So I know everybody says, make sure you're drinking your water. They're not kidding. Our 2/3 of our body is made of water, and it helps our cells survive. So it says most chemical reactions will not take place without water in your cells. So I'm talking to myself just as much as I'm talking to you. Make sure you're drinking water. It's important to have, you're eating fruits and vegetables that have a lot of water in them. And it helps the cells keep their size and their shape. It says a cell without water would be like a balloon without air. It would just kind of shrivel up. So it's really important that your cells get water. So yeah, this is kind of like a double duty lesson, kind of going along with what our cells need, but also in turn, that's what we as humans need as well. So that's why everything's important. And so watch for some activities this week, and I will talk to you later.